My friends, I hope you have your bingo cards ready because Tim Pool is about to say dystopian nightmare. The coronavirus lockdowns, questionable at best, didn't seem to work in the first place, and now everything's supposedly getting worse. Cases are skyrocketing. Hospitalizations have gone up quite a bit. Deaths have gone up a little bit, but nowhere near as bad as it was earlier on. Joe Biden says prepare for a dark winter, and now we're getting into the weird realm of conspiracies because as soon as Joe Biden said prepare for a dark winter, people start saying, hey, wasn't Operation Dark Winter a bioterror simulation? How weird. No, it really is weird. I mean, I'm not sure it really means anything. Dark winter just means like it's going to get bad, sure. But check out this story. You've clicked the thumbnail. You saw the title. An elderly woman has chosen to die instead of face another lockdown. And it is one of the most horrifying stories I've ever read. Quite short. So I do want to talk about something else for the most part. Johns Hopkins put out this newsletter where they analyzed data and found that COVID had a negligible impact upon average death counts for the year. And they were surprised because they thought you'd see a spike in elderly death rates. You didn't. Something strange happened. When people started sharing the newsletter, they abruptly and quietly deleted it without notification. I tried looking into why they deleted it, why they took it down. Can't seem to find it. But my friends, the internet is forever and we have archives of this. I first want to show you just how nightmarish these lockdowns have become. Because, look, when I first saw the headline that this older lady asked the doctor to kill her, I was like, geez, it's crazy. And then I read the actual story and I was like, yo, it's even crazier than that. Family members standing around her singing songs as the doctor killed this woman. This is nuts, man. From the National Review. An elderly Canadian woman was killed by her doctors because she would rather be dead than go through another COVID lockdown. When it looked like she would have to be confined to her room for 2 weeks, she asked for and received the lethal jab due to declining mental health and vitality. Okay, let me just stop right there. Within certain, it's hard to quantify the parameters for which I believe assisted suicide is okay, but I'm for it in certain circumstances. If there's an older person who's dying and you're putting them on life support, forcing them to suffer, but you know they're going to die, like at a certain point, it's a person's choice. However, this is COVID lockdown, an entirely a choice. These individuals could live about their lives somewhere isolated away from COVID and still be able to be around people. But look, the lockdown science is questionable at best. The World Health Organization has said it should only be a last resort. It's apparently not working anyway. We shut down movie theaters essentially indefinitely, and that did nothing. It's still getting worse, right? Okay, in that case, why are we still doing this? Here's the story they say. Russell, described by her family as exceptionally social and spry, was one such person. Her family said she chose a medically assisted death after she declined so sharply during lockdown that she didn't want to go through more isolation this winter. This time, doctors approved her. Russell would not have to go through another lockdown in her care home. She just truly did not believe that she wanted to try another one of those 2-week confinements in her room. But note, for her death, she could be surrounded by friends and family. Yeah. When 90-year-old Nancy Russell died last month, she was surrounded by friends and family. They clustered around her bed, singing a song as she had chosen to send her off, as a doctor helped her through a medically assisted death. That's some scary, nightmarish, dystopian insanity. I'm just imagining the family singing songs with smiles on their faces, tears coming down as Nana dies because of the lockdowns. This is freakish, to say the least. So companionship to be made dead, but not remain alive. And her family thinks it was a fine option, demonstrating how the social mindset becomes twisted by euthanasia consciousness. But we are told killing to end suffering is oh so compassionate, and lockdowns are measures of good public health. Bah! Those with eyes to see, let them see. My friends, there are certain circumstances where I think people have a choice in whether or not they continue. Someone could be like so horrifically maimed and disfigured, struggling to survive and just screaming nonstop. It's called putting someone out of their misery for sure. But this old lady, okay, this is the crazy thing. If they were really concerned that she couldn't socialize with people, so they had to just give her an injection to kill her, why not just let her be with her family? And if she gets COVID, then do it. Why prematurely kill this woman when she's not even sick? This, some of the craziest and creepiest I've ever seen. Look at what Cuomo did, and Wolf, and I believe Murphy. I believe all of these East Coast Democrat governors sent sick COVID patients into nursing homes, killing thousands. This is, I mean, we are well beyond normalcy. There's no return to normal. These people are patently, they're clearly insane. And I don't know what you do. Andrew Cuomo won an Emmy after he killed an estimated, this is from ProPublica, 6,500 elderly by putting sick patients into nursing homes. 6,500. That's ProPublica. That's a left-wing investigative source. They hate Trump. And they called out Cuomo for this. Is he going to get in trouble? I mean, come on, at a certain point, you've got negligent homicide or something. Nope, nothing happens. They get away with it. And when Cuomo does this, where's the ire from the mainstream press and from these activists? Not on Cuomo for this. They're screaming out how the orange man is bad. Even though Dr. Fauci said in March that Trump was doing the best he possibly could and no one could do better. And now look where we are. This is Canada, mind you. They're nuts. Let me show you this story and talk about why it's even crazier than you realize. NotTheBee.com, okay? Not the Bee is a website that's making fun of the Babylon Bee, as a satire site. They're calling it Not the Bee as a joke because these stories are so absurd, you'd think it was satire. It's not. They say, a few days ago, Johns Hopkins published a study saying corona is NBD. They then deleted it. Read it here. It's in entirety. Doc Holliday writes, Johns Hopkins published this study on Sunday, which posits that COVID is nowhere near the disaster we're being told it is. I would summarize it for you or offer pull quotes, but honestly, you just have to read it yourself because it's mind-blowing. The original article is now deleted from the Johns Hopkins website for some reason. Luckily, the internet is forever, and it's available via the Wayback Machine. Well, I actually have it via the Wayback Machine, and I want to read it for you. It's called A Closer Look at U.S. Deaths Due to COVID-19, November 22nd, and it's from the JHU newsletter. I'm terrible at reading jumbled up acronyms. Okay. It's the Johns Hopkins University newsletter.com. There we go. A closer look at U.S. deaths due to COVID. Okay. Well, first, let's take a look at the calendar on the Wayback Machine. On November 26th, there were many screenshots. So I pulled up timestamp 22/31/19. We can see the newsletter still existed. But when you pull up where you can see it turns yellow, 23/17. So at some point between those 45 or so minutes, they took the article down. I don't know why. It's gone. Let me read it for you. They say, according to new data, the U.S. currently ranks first in total COVID-19 cases, new cases per day, and deaths. Genevieve Briand, Assistant Program Director of the Applied Economics Master's Degree Program at Hopkins, critically analyzed the effect of COVID-19 on U.S. deaths using data from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention in her webinar titled COVID-19 Deaths, a Look at U.S. Data. From mid-March to mid-September, U.S. total deaths have reached 1.7 million, of which 200,000 or 12% of total deaths are COVID-19 related. Instead of looking directly at COVID-19 deaths, Briand focused on our total deaths per age group and per cause of death in the U.S. and used this information to shed light on the effects of COVID-19. She explained the significance of COVID-19 on U.S. deaths can be fully understood only through comparison to the number of total deaths in the U.S. After retrieving data from the CDC on the CDC website, Briand compiled a graph representing percentages of total deaths per age category from early February to early September, which includes the period from before COVID-19 was detected in the U.S. to after infection rates soared. Surprisingly, the deaths of older people stayed the same before and after COVID-19. Since COVID-19 mainly affects the elderly, experts expected an increase in the percentage of deaths in older age groups. However, this increase is not seen from the CDC data. In fact, the percentages of deaths among all age groups remain relatively the same. Let me just tell you, okay, let me just make sure this is clear. They deleted this article, and it may be because it is a bunk. Because it's bunk, man. We don't know. I do think it's weird that they didn't issue an editorial note explaining the problem. And so I can only assume that there was a political reason behind it, or they couldn't vet the information. I honestly have no idea why they deleted it. But I'll tell you, man, I'm not going to play selective games. Okay. It's possible the article is trash and then they realized it was trash and panicked and then deleted it. It's possible that people on the right started sharing this saying, hey, COVID's not that big of a deal. And then they panicked and said, oh no, and deleted it. I have no idea why they deleted it. But I can tell you it does make sense that what they were reporting before they did delete it, because we know that the overwhelming majority, like 90+% of people who died, and it's listed as a COVID death, have comorbidities, in which case it may contribute to the death, but it may have been the person who would die anyway. There was two really famous examples in COVID tracking. One where a person had total renal failure. Like, you're like 90 years old with renal failure, you're probably going to die, whether you have COVID or not. But the person did have COVID, or they tested positive for COVID, so they said that's a COVID death. There was another viral story where a guy died in a motorcycle accident, had COVID, and they listed that as a COVID death, apparently. But those are not, as far as I can tell, the widespread. The motorcycle one was a weird story. That was brought up in like Illinois or something. But the fact that the overwhelming majority, like 90+% of comorbidities, means they probably were about to die anyway. So think about it this way. Someone's got renal failure. They get COVID. Well, with just the renal failure, maybe they would have died in 2 or 3 weeks. With COVID, they died in 3 days. Everyone then says, see, COVID killed them. Well, if someone's dying already and they get sick, they'll probably die faster. It's just simple logic. In which case, the death probably still would have occurred in the same year. But with COVID, it happened a little bit faster. That's probably the simplest explanation for this. But think about it. They're coming out and saying that mortality has the death rate remained stable. And this woman in Canada killed herself over this. And the doctors helped. And the family sang songs and cheered as it happened. Yikes, man. Let's read a little bit more. They say, quote, the reason we have a higher number of reported COVID-19 deaths among older individuals than younger is simply because every day in the U.S., older individuals die in higher numbers than younger individuals. Briand also noted that 50,000 to 70,000 deaths are seen both before and after COVID-19, indicating that this number of deaths was normal long before COVID-19 emerged. Therefore, according to Briand, not only has COVID-19 had no effect on the percentage of deaths of older people, but it has also not increased the total number of deaths. That's weird. These data analyses suggest that in contrast to most people's assumptions, the number of deaths by COVID-19 is not alarming. In fact, it has relatively no effect on deaths in the U.S. This comes as a shock to many people. How is it that all the data lie so far from our perception? To answer that question, Briand shifted her focus to the deaths per causes ranging from 2014 to 2020. There was a sudden increase in deaths in 2020 due to COVID-19. There is no surprise because COVID-19 emerged in the U.S. in 2020, and thus COVID-19 related deaths increased drastically afterwards. Analysis of deaths per cause in 2018 revealed that the pattern of seasonal increase in the total number of deaths is a result of the rise in deaths by all causes, with the top 3 being heart disease, respiratory diseases, influenza, and pneumonia. Quote, this is true every year. Every year in the U.S., when we observe the seasonal ups and downs, we have an increase of deaths due to all COVID causes. When Briand looked at the 2020 data during that seasonal period, COVID-19 related deaths exceeded deaths from heart diseases. This was highly unusual since heart disease has always prevailed as the leading cause of deaths. However, when taking a closer look at the death numbers, she noted something strange. As Briand compared the number of deaths per cause during that period in 2020 to 2018, she noticed that instead of the expected drastic increase across all causes, there was a significant decrease in the deaths due to heart disease. Even more surprising, as seen in the graph below, this sudden decline in deaths is observed for all other causes. It's because of comorbidities. People are being listed as dying from COVID because they have COVID, and they're no longer being listed as because of heart disease or otherwise. I think it's fair to point out the way I just described it. COVID is killing people probably faster than the other issues, but thus they're going to say it's a COVID death. In the end, we probably want to take COVID seriously, more so because of lingering health effects. Like 20% of people get some kind of ongoing permanent effect. That's the ultimate problem with it. There's like scar tissue in people's lungs. But I'm not convinced it's the apocalypse. And I've said it over and over again. We're not talking about airborne Ebola. We're talking about a new virus with a higher mortality rate than the flu. But the survival rate is still around 99.9% for all people under 70 years old. But for people above 70, it's 97.5%. Why are we destroying the entire economy of the planet for this? It's political. It's entirely political. That's what I'd assume. They say this trend is completely contrary to the pattern observed in all previous years. Interestingly, as depicted in the table below, the total decrease in deaths by other causes almost exactly equals the increase in deaths by COVID-19. This suggests, according to Brand, that the COVID-19 death toll is misleading. Brian believes that deaths due to heart disease, respiratory diseases, influenza, and pneumonia may instead be recategorized as being due to COVID-19. I'm going to go ahead and say, while it's entirely possible this is just a bunk article, like someone wrote something and was wrong, when you come out and say something like that and there's a political agenda, especially around the Great Reset, Occam's razor would suggest that the real reason it was pulled is because it's true. They're claiming that people or I shouldn't say they're claiming, but it's likely that people who have heart disease and then get COVID die, and then they say it was COVID instead of heart disease, instead of saying it was a comorbidity and it was both. I guess you can't do that, huh? The CDC classified all deaths that are related to COVID simply as COVID. Even patients dying from other underlying diseases, but are infected with COVID, count as COVID-19 deaths. This is likely the main explanation as to why COVID-19 deaths drastically increased, while deaths by all other diseases experienced a significant decrease. All of this points to no evidence that COVID-19 created any excess deaths. The total death numbers are not above normal death numbers. We found no evidence to the contrary. In an interview with the newsletter, Briand addressed the question of whether COVID-19 deaths can be called misleading, since the infection might have exacerbated and even led to deaths by other underlying diseases. If the COVID-19 death toll was not misleading at all, what we should have observed is an increased number of heart attacks and increased COVID-19 numbers. But a decreased number of heart attacks and all other death causes doesn't give us a choice but to point to some misclassification. In other words, the effect of COVID-19 on the deaths in the U.S. is considered problematic only when it increases the total number of deaths or the true death burden by a significant amount in addition to the expected deaths by other causes. Since the crude number of total deaths by all causes before and after COVID-19 has stayed the same, one can hardly say, in Brian's view, that COVID-19 deaths are concerning. Well, let's do this. They actually linked to the data. And so let me pull it open, and I'm not entirely sure it'll work, but let's see if it pulls up, and we'll keep reading to see what their conclusion is. According to Briand, the over-exaggeration of the COVID-19 death number may be due to the constant emphasis on COVID-19 related deaths and the habitual overlooking of deaths by other natural causes in society. During an interview with the newsletter after the event, Purna Dharmasena, a master's candidate in applied economics, expressed his opinion about Briand's concluding remarks. At the end of the day, it's still a deadly virus, and over-exaggeration or not, to a certain degree, is irrelevant. When asked whether the public should be informed about this exaggeration in death numbers, Dharmasena stated that people have a right to know the truth. However, COVID-19 should still be continuously treated as a deadly disease to safeguard the vulnerable population. Well, are we going to do that for every single disease? And if that's the case, I'm not entirely convinced that makes the most sense. So they linked to, actually, it's from The Guardian. Wow. Here's the archive. COVID world map. Which countries have the most coronavirus cases and deaths? Creepy stuff, huh? Absolutely creepy stuff. Because here's where we stand. Well, this is embarrassing. The website's gone. John Hopkins University newsletter article, and it's just not there anymore. Why did they take it down? Honestly, I don't know. There's probably a lot of reasons. But it sounds like with the end of that article, then they asked whether the public has a right to know the truth about the over-exaggerations. They said, sure, but we should treat it seriously. What human being would be in favor of a lockdown if they knew the death toll was over-exaggerated? And they delete it. But let's play some conspiracy games. Biden warns of very dark winter as U.S. approaches 10 million coronavirus cases. The president-elect called for an end to the politicization of mitigation measures like mask wearing and social distancing. A very dark winter. Well, my friends, how about this? From John Hopkins, Bloomberg School of Public Health, about the exercise, Dark Winter. I don't mean anything. I don't know what it means. It's just funny because it's being brought up by a lot of people as like evidence of some big conspiracy. I'll tell you what I think happened. I think COVID happened. I think we started seeing these videos out of China where people were passing out in the street because they couldn't breathe. Yeah, that probably what happened. I think COVID was a serious ailment, and we saw the doctors and we saw the panic. And then it was a novel virus. We probably developed some kind of herd immunity. Sweden ignored it. didn't have any major issues. Now they're saying, oh no, but now Sweden's getting slammed by this. Oh, really? At a time when Johns Hopkins University puts out this newsletter saying the deaths are being exaggerated, it sounds like COVID came and went. Let me clarify that. It sounds like COVID is still here, but because it was a novel virus, we got slammed by it. It seems like 15 days to slow the spread actually worked, but then a bunch of feckless leaders didn't want to actually lift lockdowns because they were scared they'd be responsible for what came next. Grow up. Now it's become political. Now I think they've got an agenda and it works out really well for them. They like the Great Reset. They say COVID-19 is their opportunity for a great reset. So they don't want you to know the truth. They don't want to tell you what's really going on, and they're going to lie to you. There are people who are dying from COVID, and there's a lot of them. And it's probably important that we wear our masks and follow through on this stuff. But the fact is, the lockdowns don't make sense. To have some lady choose to die as her family sings songs is what nightmares are made of. But people are doing it with a smile on their faces. Yeah, okay, man. I'll tell you what. I'm going to mind my own business, and I'm going to call it out. And as I often say, eventually I'll just get banned from YouTube or something. Or some lunatic will start pulling quotes out of context, and then people won't be able to figure out what the truth is. They'll try and confuse you to the best of their abilities, because this kind of stuff they don't want it around. The article's been deleted. Maybe the article was BS. Sure. Okay, fine. Yeah, absolutely. I'm not one to cite things that don't exist anymore. But isn't it weird? And then Dark Winter, for those that are not familiar, was an exercise on how the U.S. would respond to a pandemic or a bioterror incident. They made a video game based on the premise. It's called The Division and The Division 2. Really fun games, by the way. I played them quite a bit back in the day. It was a while ago. It was like 6 years ago now or longer. Then Joe Biden comes out and says we're going to face a very dark winter. Sure. Poor choice of words, Biden. I don't believe there's a grand conspiracy to create or disseminate this virus. I think that politicians are exploiting it because we know that they're all like, the world's going to end in 12 years, unless we climate change. To be fair, okay. What has been said by Greta Thunberg and the likes of AOC is that in 12 years, there's going to be irreparable damage to the planet. But they keep saying that. So it's like people don't believe it anymore. They said it 10 years ago and 10 years before. In 10 years it'll happen. In 10 years it'll happen. Predicting rising oceans. And then you end up with these wealthy individuals buying beachfront property on islands and stuff. Like, they actually believe it. These politicians are telling us the end is nigh and the sky is falling. But then they themselves go out and party without masks. Like they don't care and they're not scared. I think they're just exploiting this to transfer wealth from the poor, from the middle working class to the upper class, and to have their great reset dreams. Whatever, man. It's creepy stuff. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast. It is, in fact, a different channel from this one. I know. And people say, how is that possible? It says Tim. I said, go to youtube.com/Timcast. You type it in your address bar and poof, you will be in a different YouTube channel. Isn't that weird? Don't ask me why YouTube did it that way. That's what YouTube did. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all next time.